chair of the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, and I'm head of the International Affairs Committee of the State Duma, of the previous convocation and this convocation. Next to me are the token figures of the Russian Parliament. Mr. Nikonov, first chair of the International Affairs Committee from the Parliamentary Majority Party United Russia. Vyacheslav Nikonov is also head of signature NGO of the last decades, the Russian World Foundation. And also next to me is Mr. Kalashnikov, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Russian Federation, Chairman of the Committee on the Commonwealth of Independent States, Eurasian integration and interaction with the fellow citizens, who is at the same time one of the core chairs of the Russia's Communist Party. These are the anchors, the house, but as we are complementing each other in our parliamentary life, I hope that we will act as such at our round table. We have time only until our boat trip, so I'd like to ask all the speakers to be as brief as possible, and we are going to be quite flexible and loyal, in the sense that we will not restrict the speakers, but at the same time, the topic at hand is quite interesting, quite important, but don't be carried away and try to speak for no more than several minutes. Colleagues, our regular meetings, including the ones in the framework of the updated concept of the Russia's foreign policy, and every time meeting in different formats, we speak about the demise of the Western monopoly on deciding the international life. We totally disagree with the setup of the unipolar world. Its proponents and champions like Zbigniew Brzezinski keep saying that the only pole in the modern architecture is Washington. We totally disagree with the tendency of bring about such a world order which rests on bloodshed. And this is without any joy. I speak about that. And this was confirmed by the former Yugoslavia in 2003. It was repeated in Iraq, and we became witness of the same situation in Libya, when Iraq and Libya altogether for many years have become the non-state actors. In Syria, Russia and all the participants in that round table are familiar with these events. Syria was doomed to follow the same way. The situation that is at hand is not simple, but I'm grateful to the representatives of the African continent, which have been grouping around Russia as the main driver on our way to a multipolar world order. We're speaking about the world order, which is naturally multipolar by its nature, where every nation, every people is a center of gravity with respect to their culture and language, whether the people is numerous or not numerous. And the West tramping under feet these fundamental principles, which besides are enshrined in the United Nations Charter. The United States and its allies, I don't mean the United States in general, there are lots of my friends living there, heads and stakeholders in different foundations, academics and public figures who adhere to a totally different viewpoint, but I imply the today's incumbent establishment in Washington. The United States and its allies are obsessed with the strive to bring about, to restore neocolonialism, making sure that neocolonialism becomes the way forward for our civilization, and to prevent the objective trend of rising of new centers of gravity. Mr. Nikonov is working within the scientific committee of the BRICS, and he wouldn't share such an approach. Mr. Putin, speaking in the Kremlin on September 30th, 2022, said, I quote, "The United States tries to impose or to make the whole mankind pay ransom. And this results in a multi-year perennial attempt to contain Russia, expanding NATO eastward and turning the fraternal Ukraine into anti-Russian, a kind of a springboard used in order to exercise pressure on us and to bring about confrontation against us." End quote. Such a line in the foreign policy of the United States and its accomplices reached a point of no return when Ukraine, being led by the West, decided to obtain nuclear arms. We had to start a military operation. And we are rejecting colonialism, Nazism, and all the anti-humane, destructive tendencies which, to my regret, are being brought about by the West in Ukraine. Today, the United States and its allies are waging a hybrid war using nationalist forces in Ukraine as a kind of ram against us. The restoration of neocolonialism and aggressive tendencies promoted by the United States are not hidden, so the very objective is to destroy our economy and to fence us with a kind of a military fence, making us a pariah. They're using a wide range of tools, resulting to the support of Nazis. This is what Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin called for, speaking about the need to supply high-precision weapons to the Nazi forces of Ukraine and ending with the arms and weapons which are being actively used against us on the battlefield. Besides, dozens of thousands of sanctions and restrictions which are totally unique for the global history, but nevertheless our national economy is being strengthened, and we act as a magnet for dozens of countries in the Latin America and African continent, which representatives have gathered today in that room, who stand up along with us against a unipolar world, who stand up for a safer multipolar world. And saying that, I'd like to pass the floor to my friend and my colleague, Vyacheslav Nikonov, who would act as a moderator of that roundtable. He would be followed by Mr. Kalashnikov. And I follow my list of speakers, where I have several dozens of participants in that forum. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Mr. Nikonov, over to you. Your Excellencies, dear friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, chers amis, Votre Excellence,
friends, Nelson Mandela once said, "Freedom cannot be partial." The countries of the world achieved their independence, but full decolonization has not come true. There is a long way to go. Economic and political decolonization are upcoming. We are looking forward to informational decolonization, the one of culture, but in my opinion, the most important thing we have to decolonize, that's our minds. our minds. We're living, being held by the Western matrix, Western cast of mind. There are lots of cases of that. We're held hostage of that. We can find that in the textbooks which are being used by our school students and undergraduates. We are using different notions which were developed in the West and which are aimed at confirming the Western supremacy. Us, I mean everyone present here in that room, including Russia. For instance, still we're speaking about the first world, the second world, the third world. But why? The Western world is number one. How we determine that this is the world number one, what metrics we're using, why they insist that they're number one. Homo sapiens was born in Africa, Adam and Eve, whose genes are living in every person present in that room. They all lived in Africa, not anywhere else. The civilization was spawned in Egypt, in China, in India, but not in the West. The global religions, such as Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, any global religion also was born in the East, not in the West. Culture, well, a walking distance from here is the Bolshoi Theater, which is older than the United States of America. What culture they are telling us about? If we look at the economics, BRICS nations, the Big Five, is bigger than G7 in terms of the economy. So the West is by no means number one. And if they call themselves number one, this is a pure racism. Historically, they are the last world. Or sometimes they say that there are developed nations and developing nations, or underdeveloped nations. There is a big grain of racism in that, because many countries of the world are developing and they are rising in terms of the economy, and they help the societies to develop. But there are undeveloping nations. These are the Western ones. They fail to develop. There is no economic growth for quite a while. Europe doesn't see any economic growth for 2 decades, and it will not happen in the years to come. Why? They call themselves developed ones, and we are not developed ones. They undeveloping ones. We're democracy versus autocracy. I will now elaborate on that, but democracy in the Western lingua is what the United States likes, and autocracy means that this is something that the United States doesn't like, or it dislikes. But we're still using these notions as if they have some different meaning, where they speak about the liberal, rules-based world order. But it is not liberal because it implies only one viewpoint, and this is the Western one. That world order certainly is not international, because it proceeds from the presumption of a unipolar world, and this is not an order because it is based on the American lawlessness, and no one is familiar with the rules which have been mentioned every now and then. So the rules are the principles decided on by Washington. They speak about the human rights and freedom of consciousness, etc., etc. But again, that's a lie, because the Western values were totally different for many centuries. For many centuries, they bet on colonialism, nationalism, chauvinism, and trading in slaves also used to be a value. William Du Bois, as Americans love to say, speaking at the Versailles Conference, quoted a figure of 110 million Africans who fell victim of the global slave trading. the values of imperialism, values of Nazism, fascism. These things were invented not by the Russians, by the Chinese, or by the Africans. These were the notions and values invented by the West now. Added to that is the value of transgender culture and same-sex marriages. For us, democracy is the ability to follow the will of your own people, and not following the will of the CIA, State Department, of other structures of the American deep state. In essence, we represent a global majority. We have the West, which sometimes calls itself a golden billion, but it is not golden, it is gold-tinted and gilded billion. Several years ago, the 8 billion person was born on planet Earth. 7/8 of the global population, that's not the West. These are the countries that are represented by global giants, such as Africa, for instance, 1.4 billion people living there, which is 1.5 times more than the collective West. If you add China, 1.4 billion more, or India, 1.4 billion more, so it would make more than half of the population of the Earth. And we still have Russia, the ASEAN nations on the list. There is an overwhelming majority of the people who are being guided by the values that we have to follow. The values, democracy, respect for the tradition, non-interference with the affairs of others, respect for each other. We have to consider ourselves a global majority. We have to build our own agenda. We have to offer our own metrics of mind, of decision-making. These are not them who are the world number one. This is us. We are the light and good, not them. They represent the forces of neocolonialism and darkness. If we stand on that position of a global majority, then we will win. I started my pitch with the words of Nelson Mandela. I will end with his words again. He said that to be free is not just to get rid of the shackles, but to live multiplying the freedom of others and respecting that freedom. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Nikonov. Mr. Kalashnikov, over to you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Slutsky, my comrade, and I'm turning to you, my good friends. Picking it up from Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, thanks to my senior friends who remember the USSR times, they were professing these principles in their life, what neocolonialism is about. I, as a person who was born in the USSR, I know that very well. So when Nelson Mandela came to the USSR, or to Russia, he decided he wanted to meet my friends, communists, and I'm deputy head of the Russia's Communist Party. And my friends are professing these ideals and principles and believe themselves to be heirs to the Soviet Communist Party, or successors. And I understand why we have gathered in that room, and certainly I want everyone who wants to share his or her viewpoints could do that, because in order to speak up, we have other opportunities. So I just want to draw an example as how the modern Russia, in its state-building efforts, Russia, which in 1990s wanted to build another colony on the remnants of the USSR, and it was not mentioned. But again, there was a feeling that this is a colony being built on the remnants of the USSR, and the center, which is called the West, wanted to benefit from that.
Now, starting from the turn of the century, we are well aware of that, and those integration groups that we have been building and probably many of you know what I'm talking about. Inter alia, with the help of the republics that are now independent but used to belong to the USSR. So I'm referring to the Eurasian Economic Union in particular, or the CIS community, Commonwealth of Independent States. So we build all that on the principles of equality, no matter whether they are small, like Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, or larger, like Ukraine, or mid-sized Belarus or big Russia. Each of them has a veto right. Even if Russia doesn't like that, we have to take that into account. Sometimes it precludes promptness in governance, expeditiousness, but it gives us more equity and equal footing. And I welcome you on behalf of our committee, my parliamentary committee on the ties with CIS and compatriots. And I'd like to mention one more thing. Our compatriots residing in other countries, including in Africa, are numerous. We visit Africa quite often. We have political ties there. And the number of compatriots living there has increased over the couple past decades. So we would really like you to capitalize and trade on that resource, to tap into it. Because they definitely sympathize with their motherland and represent it, and I think it is going to be an additional benefit and help and assistance for you. I wish you every success in your efforts. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we move to this speaker list, and I remind you that we have to close no later than at 7, or just a trifle bit later, so that we can get to the protocol event in the evening on time, and we have a lot of speakers on the list. His Excellency, Mr. Malik Diao, Chair of the National Transition Council of the Republic of Mali, dear Mr. President, President of the Parliamentary of Parliament of Mali, I give you the floor.
Monsieur le Président de la Duma, Mesdames et
Mr. President of the State Duma, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, speakers of parliaments, representatives of national parliaments, MPs, round-table participants, ladies and gentlemen, with great pleasure, I take the floor at this second international parliamentary conference that is mostly dedicated to the fight against neo-colonialism. I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation that we received. Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, Ghana's ex-president in 1956 first used that notion, the notion of neo-colonialism. And that concept is about the new policies of colonial states towards our countries, but actually it is a form of imperialism. And Ghana's president also said that neocolonialism actually is effective freedom and takeover of the former colonies and seizing control of them by the colonial nations. It is no secret that the independence that the colonial powers allegedly granted us was yet another form of suppression of us. I believe that with the provision of independency, neocolonialism, well, colonialism didn't come to an end, and now the transnational companies are, as well as non-governmental entities, are the main vehicles of neocolonialism. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, the ideological hegemony by the West is used by the colonizers at all times. That is meant and designed to dominate the countries that they suppress. They use ancient forms and methods. They have been controlling and overseeing the information that they put on speed to us, and that constantly is reflected in their policies and in their language. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a multifaceted process, and in Mali, we have finally taken a new road. We want our country to become fully sovereign and truly sovereign. Under the leadership of Colonel Goita, that has been heading our transitional government and council, we have opted for this pathway, and it is our debt in front of our brothers and sisters and future generations to eradicate neocolonialism on our soil. And we have been toiling hard every day. We will stick to our guns, and then on the 14th of January 2022, we pronounced against the unlawful sanctions, inhumane sanctions of ECOWAS. We are now to redouble our efforts so that we can breed a new generation of leaders, intellectuals, and decision makers. 60 years ago, a rally dedicated to friendship between the peoples of Mali and the USSR was held, and the first president of Mali in May 1962 said as follows, I quote him as saying that each step that is taken in Mali and the policies that we pursue is to fight colonialism and imperialism, and each decision that we make has, as a consequence, attainment of our sovereignty. We don't want any foreign nation to control our country. This is the path that we are pursuing, and there are lines in our national anthem, I quote, if the enemy attacks us, both inside and outside, all the people will stand up and line up against the enemy, and we are decided to sacrifice our lives. Ladies and gentlemen, the unity of our people requires similar steps in all the nations of the African continent. So they should get the control of power as it is them who understand the interests and the needs of their people. I call on everyone to think and consider the realities of the African continent. Let us make sure that all the African elites stand up against all forms of neocolonialism together in concert, and that the sovereignty of our people should prevail. We will not be found wanting, and we owe it to the future generations, and our fathers fought for the independence of our nations, and our generation, the current generation, should fight all the forms of neocolonialism and oppression of our people. Africa will never abandon this path and will never swerve off, and we will fight till the end. We will not allow the times of colonialism to come back. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Moderator, time is high now for the neocolonialists to understand that their time has gone. And we have now a right to take full control of our sovereignty and interests, and for the sake of our people, the people of Mali, we want to end the crisis that has been killing our people and repressing it. Ladies and gentlemen, any cooperation with Mali is, most importantly, the fight against colonialism. And Mr. Goita, President of the Transition Council of Mali, said that we should respect the sovereignty of our nation, of our strategic partners. We must take into account the interests of the people of Mali. These are the three principles that are the foundation, the backbone, that underlie our existence, the existence of our state, and we should act on the basis of mutual respect. And I'd like to convey gratitude on the part of Colonel Goita and the whole of the National Transition Council to the Russian authorities and President of the Russian Federation, His Excellency Mr. Putin, that has been assisting us wholeheartedly while we go through this very difficult streak of our history. Thank you. The high quality of cooperation between Mali and the Russian Federation is a testimony and evidence of the fact that great future lies ahead of us. And this round table is going to be a success, I'm sure. I'm quite positive that a juster world will come into fruition as a result of our work. Thank you very much for your attention. A fairer world is what we strive for. I thank you very much, Mr. President, for your very interesting intervention. Our next speaker is His Excellency Mr. Amos Musondo, President of the National Council of the Province of Senate of the South African Republic.
Thank you very much, Honorable Facilitator and Moderator. Good afternoon to everyone, and greetings to everybody. Program Director, Chairwoman of the Federation Council, Honorable Valentina Matvienko, Chairman of the State Duma, Honorable Yachilev Volodin, Session Moderators, Chairman of the State Duma Committee on International Affairs, Honorable Leonid Slatsky, Chairman of the State Duma Committee for Commonwealth of Independent States, Eurasia Integration and Relation with Compatriots, Honorable Leonid Kalashnikov, First Deputy Chairman of the State Duma Committee on International Affairs, Honorable Vyacheslav Nikolov, Honorable fellow presiding officers and members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. Program Director, allow me to thank you for this opportunity to share our view from the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa on the topic Neo-Colonialism of the West, how to prevent the repetition of history on this occasion of the second International Parliamentary Conference hosted by Russia under the theme Russia-Africa in a multipolar world. Bilateral relations between South Africa and Russia are good and have been so since the diplomatic relations were established in 1992. In 1994, South Africa emerged from a bitter history of colonialism, racism, and apartheid to a democratic dispensation with the task of building a new nation. As the last country to be freed in Africa, South Africa, as would be expected, still bears the scars of inequality caused by, amongst other things, segregation in education, in health, in welfare, in transport, and employment. However, the quest for Pan-African identity and unity, which was informed by the belief that colonialism was at the heart of Africa's economic, political, and social problems, inspires our current trajectory. In terms of context, allow me, Program Director, to quote the words of Nkwame in his book, Africa Must Unite, who reminds us that, quote, we have to free ourselves from the grip of economic imperialism and protect our freedom. We have at the same time to work ceaselessly for the complete liberation and unity of Africa, close quote. He says, quote, imperialism is still a most powerful force to be reckoned with in Africa. It controls our economies. It operates on a worldwide scale in combination of many different kinds: economic, political, cultural, educational, military, and through intelligence and information services, and will continue to assume new forms and subtle disguises. He also calls on us, quote, to present a unified front and a continental purpose, close quote. On understanding neocolonialism, neocolonialism is defined as the use of economic, political, and cultural, ideological, or other pressures to control or influence other countries, especially former colonies. It can also be viewed as the intrusion of foreign economic domination as well as military and political intervention in states that have already achieved independence from colonial rule. In the context of Africa, the Pan-African movement championed the struggles of Africans and peoples of African descent for emancipation and the restoration of their dignity against slavery, colonialism, and all forms of racism and racial oppression. Driven by the anti-imperial and anti-colonial stance, leaders of Africa's new independent states sought to pursue their stance. Leaders of Africa's newly independent states sought to pursue their dream of continental unity as a means to fight all these forms of exploitation and oppression. The then president of Ghana and founding member of the Organization of African Unity, Dr. Nqakula, once noted that the essence of neo-colonialism is that the state which is subject to it is in theory independent and has all the outward trappings and international sovereignty. That in reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from outside. Nkrumah felt that the result of neo-colonialism is that foreign capital is used for the exploitation rather than the development of the less developed parts of the world. That investment under colonialism increases rather than decreases the gap between the rich and the poor countries of the world. And that the struggle against neo-colonialism is not aimed at excluding the capital of the developed world from operating in less developed countries. Rather, it is aimed at preventing the financial power of the developed countries being used in such a way as to impoverish the less developed. Nkrumah noted that neo-colonialism is also the worst form of imperialism, and that for those who practice it, it means power without responsibility. And those who suffer from it, it means exploitation without redress. On Africa's response, Program Director, the establishment of the OAU in 1963 marked the beginning of a long pursuit for the unity of the continent. It also marked the pursuit for the political and economic emancipation of its people, as well as cooperation amongst them. In 2002, the African leaders decided to launch the African Union in order to build on the work of the OAU. This followed the realization that it was now important to work for increased cooperation and integration of the African states to drive Africa's growth and economic development. One of the concrete expressions of this vision was the adoption of Agenda 2063 on the occasion of the celebration and celebrating the OAU and AU Golden Jubilee in 2013. Agenda 2063 is a strategic long-term planning instrument for the development of Africa. It is a concrete manifestation of the Pan-African drive for unity, self-determination, freedom, progress, and collective prosperity. Its goals and priorities include a high standard of living, quality of life, and well-being for all citizens. It includes well-educated citizens and skills revolution. It includes transformed economies. It includes world-class infrastructure. It includes preservation of peace, security, and stability. And it includes the health, well-nourished citizens. It is important to note that South Africa's National Development Plan, which aims to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality by 2030, is aligned to the AU's Agenda 2063. This represents our effort at national and continental level to push back against neo-colonialism. on key strategies to prevent neocolonialism in Africa and the developing world, Program Director, there are many strategies that we can use to prevent neocolonialism, especially in Africa and in the developing world. Of the many, I would like to highlight the following briefly without going into details and without presenting what may seem like some exhaustive list. Firstly, we need to promote economic self-reliance. Secondly, we need to diversify our economies. Thirdly, we need to encourage the protection and use of local natural resources. Fourthly, we need to develop and strengthen democratic institutions. Fifthly, we need to promote education. Having said that, let me add 2 or 3 others. We need to develop and strengthen democratic institutions. We need to promote inter-regional trade. We need to promote regional integration, and we need to invest in infrastructure. And lastly, we need to silence the guns in Africa and the developing world. Program Director, as I conclude, allow me to say the following. That about 3 decades ago, South Africa emerged from a bitter history of colonialism, racism, and apartheid. We joined the quest for Pan-African identity and unity. For we've always been a Pan-African organization informed by the belief that colonialism was and is at the center of Africa's economic, political, and social problems. The establishment of the OAU in 1963 and the launch of the AU in 2002 marked important steps in Africa's fight to prevent neo-colonialism. One of the concrete expressions of AU's vision was the adoption of Agenda 2063, which is a concrete manifestation of the Pan-African drive for unity, self-determination, freedom, progress, and collective prosperity. From our own experience, there are many strategies that will be employed to prevent neo-colonialism. They include promoting economic alliance, diversifying economy, providing quality education for the citizens, investing in infrastructure, and encouraging the use of local languages and cultural identity. With these few remarks, Program Director, please allow me to once again express an appreciation for this opportunity to speak to this audience. And to make an input on behalf.
I'm very much pleased to speak in front and taking part in that very important conference. As a man cannot allow that colonialism remerge future ways to develop the challenges that we are encountering internationally. At the same time, open broad opportunities to build a dialogue, not only for the rich and strong countries in Africa, but the people in Africa strive seeking for their real independence. But this might be achieved only by means of original and authentic solidarity among the African people, including the real liberation of the peoples of Sakura in the fight against neocolonialism. The revolution in Algeria that took place at the time gave an opportunity to our people to achieve real freedom, to support the liberation movement across the globe. The efforts which are applied by Algeria in order to achieve independence are aimed first and foremost at facilitating the African peoples in the search for freedom. And this assistance acquires different forms, diplomatic and military ones, training of national workforce for friendly nations also is taking place. That's a very important priority for us. There are principles which are put in the foundation of the diplomatic work of Algeria, are aimed at further development of free peoples in their best interests. We're supporting the values which are crucial for the people of these countries. The people of Algeria goes on supporting different Arab nations which are fighting against colonialism in its different forms in order to defeat poverty and dominance in its various forms. We go on supporting liberation movements in different countries, thus ensuring succession and continuity of our policy in various areas. We are standing up for real liberation of Jerusalem from Israeli domination. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much. Esteemed colleague, can say that. I pass the floor to Robert Capopusi, Chair of the Committee of Benin Parliament. Over to you. Over to you. Let the peace rest with you. In the name of Allah, merciful and benevolent, I convey my fraternal greeting to you. I'd like to thank the Russia's leadership for that kind invitation for organizing our conference, and I wholeheartedly welcome all the African delegates who arrived to attend that conference. I will speak open blank. This is my habit, and I will speak on behalf of all Africans. The topic we are discussing today is neocolonialism of the West, how to make sure that it doesn't repeat itself. This topic can be much broader. When we speak about neocolonialism, that implies not only Africa. That's a global problem. There is Western neocolonialism on planet Earth, and every day we are fighting against that form, but there are other forms and shapes of neocolonialism. And I think it is not possible to speak about sovereignty without saying that neocolonialism is a global phenomenon. I think that here in Russia we can speak about that openly and clearly. We should not discuss fighting against colonialism without saying that in the 20th century there was a very lengthy period of time throughout which colonialism would be on the rise. Throughout 20th century, capitalist bloc was juxtaposed to the socialist one. When the Berlin Wall fell, the West believed that it won, and that the capitalism has become the global religion, and everyone has to worship it, and therefore they proclaimed neoliberalism, an economic one and a political one. And this has become a world religion too. They believe that all the countries of the world have to worship it, have to profess that religion, that they have to adapt their economic systems. Many countries of the world rejected that because really this is a new form of suppression and oppression. It imposes on us a new vision of a family, of gender relations, spirituality, religion, and it proposes distorted materialism. It's been illustrated by various cases and examples. That's why many countries rose against that. They spoke against this Western unipolar world. As for Russia, China, India, and many other countries are concerned, these countries totally disagree with that policy. They spoke against that policy, and they vetoed the hegemony of the Western world. That's why, between these two poles, between those two blocks, on the one hand we find the West with its unipolar world, and Russia, Iran, India, China, which stand up for a multipolar world. There is a real war being waged between those two blocks, and in between we find Africa. Africa, which everyone wants to conquer, so that Africa would side them. But African peoples, once again, act as a judge, as an arbitrator of the global history. The West has taken off the masks, and it promotes and facilitates neocolonialism, acting through its international organizations, military organizations and associations, cultural interference. This hegemony, in essence, manifests itself more clearly. But this Western policy can be denied by means of our friends, such as Russia, such as China and other countries, that state that they are ready to help us in the fight against neocolonialism. And we thank them for that, because always friends have to tell the truth openly. And let us always be honest and frank. We'll be honest in our dealings. Really, The fight against neocolonialism, this is a must, but it doesn't mean that the African nations want to replace one colonizer with another. For instance, we love China very much. That's a very powerful global country, a superpower. This is the partner number one of the African continent. This is a country which helps Africa a lot. But there are certain deviations from the realpolitik being manifested, and sometimes China acts as a new colonizer, something we totally disagree with. Our peoples do not agree with that. And Russia is also our sincere partner. We are very grateful to Russia that really helps many African countries. We also can note, and I put that point blank, that from time to time we still have certain deviations in some issues. For instance, this is typical of Central African Republic and other countries where Russia is not fair to our peoples, and probably you did not expect to hear such words, but I immediately said that I'm going to tell the truth, to speak openly. The friends have to be open in our relations. Let us respect each other. The people of African origin, our compatriots who are living in the Western countries, encountered many difficulties. They're facing discrimination. Sometimes they would be oppressed there in the West. They would be told they have to leave the Western countries. And this is how the West manifests its superiority. This is the root cause of all the problems, but a real partnership should rest on a sincere friendship. And I call on Russia, let us not repeat the mistakes of the Western countries. We want the world to be multipolar. We want Africa, Russia, China, India, Iran, and many other countries resist and efficiently fight against the Western colonialism. But we will be against any attempts, any efforts to impose on us a new colonizing policy. And those who keep saying that you can become rich in Africa without respecting our values and culture. This is not true. We want to be free and independent peoples, and that would be in the best interest of everyone. Life or death, but we will win. Thank you so much. Mr. Kwesiba. Instead of that, I'm passing the floor. I pass on the baton to my co-chair and friend, Mr. Nikonov. Mr. Nikonov, over to you. Thank you so much. The pitch by Mr. Siba really was very interesting, but unfortunately, in that room, we do not see a representative of the National Assembly of the Central African Republic, Mr. Salangi. Unfortunately, he failed to attend this meeting. I think that he would have a totally different view of what is going on in his home country, in the Central African Republic, and he would share a totally different perspective on how Russia assists his home country. But saying that, I would like to pass the floor to the First Secretary from Equatorial Guinea, Martin Chris and Mumba. And really, he has an extensive experience because Equatorial Guinea was a colony of Spain, Portugal, other countries, and we can agree with Mr. Siba. This is neocolonialism. This is a global issue, a global problem, and we have to get rid of colonial dependence. Many countries, including England and other countries. Mr. Member, over to you.
Parlamentarios aquí reunidos,
En nombre de
Dear members of parliament, ladies and colleagues, on behalf of the National Parliament of Equatorial Guinea, and following the instruction of esteemed President of Senate Teresa F.R. Assangona, I speak as the head of the delegation and first secretary of the Presidium of the Senate of Equatorial Guinea. First of all, I'd like to thank the Parliament of the Russian Federation for their kind invitation and for the warm hospitality that we received ever since we arrived to Russia. My presentation is dedicated to neocolonialism of the West and how to prevent that story being repeated. So what neocolonialism is about? That's a geopolitical and strategic practice with the main feature were featured by the strive for making fortune. The metropolis or colonizing countries have developed a number of tools that help them to get benefits without investing anything, living at the expense of the natural resources of the countries that only achieved their independence, and at the expense of the countries that have recently fell victim of coup d'etats that mostly were provoked by the colonizing countries. When they saw that this or that ruler would deny obeying their orders and executing their will. So we see that the difference between neocolonialism and colonialism lies only in the fact that colonialism required exploitation of a man by a man and presence of a military might directly on site in the colony, when the local people would be replaced with the colonizers once the profits were made. After the political liberation of the colony, the old economic structures were preserved, so they depended on the imports from the metropolis. The valuable natural resources that were designed for being exported to the West, that's another feature. Another feature, lack of technical means, lack of capital, and the fact that colonizers owned the means of production. This helped to lose the domination of the colonizing nations. So in that sense, neocolonialism is about the rule of the former colonizers over their former colonies. So it means that the liberation movement did not result in the real independence of the developing or underdeveloped nations, but it resulted in the fact that the imperialist countries created a new structure of policy and economics, globally making sure that they preserve the colonial exploitation. Neocolonialism has become a continuation of the historical colonialism, a continuation of the global capitalist system.
It's a new phase of colonialism that allows for further oppression without any need for the colonizer to be present in a country. Just sophisticated and complex economic and political strategies suffice to keep pillaging and robbing the victim countries without a need to conquer their territory, and inclusion of those countries into their national borders. This new order is as archaic and unjust as the former forms of colonialism. How shall we avoid repeating the history? First of all, we should think of mutual respect between countries and equal footing treatment of one another with respect to sovereignty in particular. And we must be watching and making sure that the UN-centric approach should prevail, UN-centered approach should prevail, and we should overcome the existing problems and reduce at least the destructive effect of these problems over southern countries. This objective may be vague, but unless we begin this undertaking, we will not be able to rid the suffering countries from its new version, globalization. Strengthening the economies of the repressed and oppressed countries is the main objective that will allow us to shake off the yoke of neocolonialism. We should upskill and train our people. We should train professionals that will do common and specific and specialist goals, that would practice trade and develop economy to get rid of the neocolonialism. But these steps may not result in anything if the geopolitical situation remains unchanged, because the economic might is something that underlies the power of neocolonial states and nations. We may recall Resolution 2625 of the 25th session of UN General Assembly. And here I'd like to show what the role of the African Union is with respect to the global community. If we recall Resolution 2625 as of the 24th of October 1970, adopted at the 24th session of General Assembly, it touches upon friendly relations and cooperation and amicable principles between nations based on the UN Charter. Let's recall one of the paragraphs saying that all the countries use sovereign equality, enjoying same rights and responsibilities, and are equitable members of the global community without reckoning their differences. So the inequality because of the economic or other respects is mentioned in this quote, but no solution is offered. If the UN demonstrates this approach towards this matter that is of paramount importance, we, the African countries, must pursue the resolution of that matter on our own and vest the African Union with responsibility to make a difference, which is a noble entity with noble goals. We see that the implementation of Resolution 2625 is impossible because of the economic, social, political, and other inequality, which is the legacy of colonialism, and that has persisted till nowadays because of the new colonialism and globalization. It's another version, it's specific version. I am representing the National Assembly of Equatorial Guinea, and I'd like to share with you the data that the European Union on the 16th of February 2023 adopted a resolution that is yet another manifestation of the fact that neocolonialism has been watching and tracing and interfering with the former colonies and taking no account for the official position and version that we offer. They condemned our country for the fact that a person that was condemned by a court because of the terrorist activities in our country died for natural reasons in one of the hospitals of our country. The Parliament of Equatorial Guinea protested against this resolution of the European Parliament that was adopted at the behest of the former metropolis of ours, Spain. What I'm talking about is the reality of Africa and my specific country. We used to be colonies. We still can act in concert to condemn what has happened and is happening and fight against that. Thank you for taking time. I hope I haven't taken much of your time. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now, with pleasure, I give the floor to one of the best intellectuals of this country, Natalia Narochnicka, President of the Foundation for Studying of the Historical Perspective. Natalia is a maven of world history. Distinguished guests, participants, excellencies, scientists, scholars, it is a privilege for me to speak at this round table. The things that I have already heard today are heartening. I believe that the fight for a fair world and its diversity will be successful. We know that 2022 was a watershed year between epochs. Russia has committed a dramatic act of self-consciousness that was key for its own development and for the global situation. This choice of ours is fraught with many a problem, but it is the only way to restore our dignity, historical dignity, and find our role bearing in the system of reference of history and civilization. And this choice has subverted the US-centered world order with its specialist neocolonial methods, and it has devalued the axioms that Mr. Nikonov mentioned in his introductory remarks. When we try to repel their allegations and accusations, they're absurd because they have trampled upon their own standards and rules that attracted everybody and appealed to everybody 200 years ago, including Russian intellectuals that bowed to Descartes' logic and Mona Lisa's smile now would see only Kabbalah lines and traces of transnational corporations and usurers everywhere. And postmodernism, philosophy of human destruction, which is the transgender Bolshevik doctrine that has been destroying the sense of human existence. I'm a woman, I'm a professor. I know women who are cosmonauts, astronauts, pilots, military, etc. Never ever a Russian woman will become a feminist. She will not speak against the law given by God. She definitely will always cherish her home and try to preserve the backbone of life itself that was vested by the Lord. And this is a red cloth for the Western world now. Well, the geopolitical reality that the world has faced last year had been expected long before. For a while, they tried to oust Russia and squeeze it further from the seas to the northeast of Eurasia, away from the seas that made it a great power in the past. All the color revolutions across our perimeter, which is the ellipsis, global hydrocarbon ellipsis, including the Balkans, Iran, Iraq, and other regions of the world. Why is it so important that Russia has spoken up against that. Why Russia? Why is that important? Could that have been any other country? Well, I'll tell you one thing. It's Russia, not the Anglo-Saxon countries. Well, Russia is a reduced copy of all the diverse and versatile world in its climatic zones, development gaps, creeds, mindsets, and other things and hallmarks. Russia knows the life of palaces and cabins without water supply. We know the permafrost and we know the desert. The Russian people, as the great Russian scientist Khrushchevsky said, even at the pre-Christian epoch, they had international fighting squads. We are used to living next to other creeds and cultures and respect their idiosyncrasy and accept them as they are. And those who flaunt their exceptionalism cannot do so. Like 100 years ago, Senator Beveridge said that America had a great lot of running pagans and evil nations. This was Christian at the beginning of the 20th century. It was not the 10th century with crude morality. So the Anglo-Saxon world and the paranoid, anti-Russian, paranoid-stricken Poland, typical of their noblemen, the insipid Europe that has lost all the foundation of the European culture, once great, have launched a crusade against us that is permeated with hatred towards us, all-pervading hatred. Now, experts say that we are amid World War III, not in scale of hostilities, but with respect to existential collision. Two manifestations of progress and two interpretations of future are colliding. The end of history is their philosophy, a history without any morality and goal setting, with no line between beauty and ugliness, harmony and mishmash, good and evil. And our response is modernizing, but still preserving the vibrant human soul and the conscience given by the God, and understanding the line and border between good and evil, boon and bane, virtue and sin. I can see the conventional traditional societies in Africa, in Asia, in the Arab world that I know like the palm of my hand. When I worked in the UN Secretariat, I made acquaintances with the Egyptians and Lebanese, and they were very different. A westernized Lebanon resident and a true believer from Egypt, praying 5 times a day, but still we were close friends with both of them. We found a lot in common with those people. So I believe that our struggle will not be brief or short. The world will not change in a year, but it has cracked, and the process is inevitable, irreversible, and it is within our might to make sure that we can see the multinational elite and the sovereignty finally obtained, and our people should not be subject to neocolonialism, living in alignment with their motherland, with their home, with their future and with their traditions. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I thank the organizers for this chance to speak. I think that you will agree with me that Natalia is one of the most brilliant intellectuals in our country. I hope the interpreters coped with that. Mr. Akweri Abvani from the Republic of Uganda. Will you please take the floor?
Organizers of this interaction, comrade delegates, I will be very brief because I don't want to repeat what others have said, but I'm here to represent the global Pan-African movement, which has been battling with the threat of neocolonialism in Africa for the last 70 or so years. I'd like to thank the Russian government, the Duma and the Council of the Federation, and the people of the Russian Federation for their long-standing interest in and support for African causes. I would like to thank the Russian Federation for its support for the liberation movements in Africa, the anti-colonial and neo-colonial struggles. We received support from Russia when it was in the Soviet Union, for Algeria, for Egypt, for Ethiopia, for Zimbabwe, for Angola, for Namibia, for South Africa, and very many other African countries. For that, we are internally indebted to the people of the Russian Federation. We'd also like to thank the Russian Federation for supporting the Pan-African causes in international fora, especially the United Nations. Now, what is the context of what we're being faced now today? Where does the threat lie? For us in the Pan-African movement, we feel that the threat lies in the emergence of other strong economies which are not directly tied to the Western hegemonic powers, the United States leading and Western Europe following. So as the West becomes weaker and other countries emerge, there is a fear. Europe, Western Europe, and the United States are afraid of other emerging power centers on the world stage. That, for us, is the context. So, why does that become dangerous? We all saw in 2003, when the United States invaded Iraq, without a UN resolution, on the pretext of finding weapons of mass destruction, a pretext that was wrong, and later on we found out that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Then, as if that was not bad enough, they destroyed the economy and peoples of Afghanistan. They went to Libya in 2011, supervised the murder of a head of state, and destroyed the economy and society of the Libyan people. In the African Union, we protested. But at that time, we were not organized enough to find a center of gravity and mass military capacity to defend the people of Libya. But it was a lesson that was well learned. So, What is the neo-colonial agenda? The neo-colonial agenda of the West is to continue the brazen intervention in other countries and unilateral actions by blackmailing the infrastructure of the United Nations. The second one is to continue the politics of the dollar and the euro in order to be able to control international trade. And also the politics of controlling energy sources across the world. The third is to launch an information and media campaign that turns the countries of the world against the Russian Federation, China, Iran, and other countries that can point a different way forward for the global system to be fairer and more just. In conclusion, we in the Pan-African movement think that the way of the Russian Federation is the correct way. So, we would want closer economic cooperation between Africa and the Russian Federation, and condemnation and resistance against the unilateral and illegitimate sanctions against the Russian Federation. Number two, we would like to explore avenues for closer military, defense, and security cooperation, and defending the security interests of vulnerable African countries. Number three, to launch a robust and coordinated strategic communication and defense engagement so that the world should know the genuine interests, economic, political, and military of the Western world. And finally, to urge our brothers that for us to be able to engage the world, Africa must unite. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Instead of that, I'm passing the mediatorship and passing the baton to my colleague and my friend, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, His Excellency Mr. Kalashnikov. Thank you so much, Mr. Slutsky. Thank you so much, Mr. Query Ervani. You mentioned a very interesting experience, a tragic one. Case of Libya. We in Russia also felt a lot of pain regarding that situation. Different political forces treated that differently and prompted us to take totally different ways of cooperation, nudging us to side some Western forces. But we did it like you did that in Africa. We made our conclusions, learned our lesson from that case, and that's why today we have gathered here and we analyze once again that case. Let me pass the floor to Natalia Yam from Cameroon. She's going to speak about colonialism, neo-colonialism, and how to resist that. And the next speaker would be Mr. David Kalatum from Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, dear chairs of parliaments, first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers from the State Duma who invited us to attend that conference, who gave us an opportunity to speak up, in my opinion, from the standpoint of the people of African nations. We are discussing very important issues. For instance, neo-colonialism of the West. How to prevent that being replicated in future. And today, I'd like to say that there is a total need to fight against falsification of history. on the territory of the former French colonies. I continuously condemn that policy, and this is what I said in 2019 at the first summit meeting, Russia-Africa. And after that, I had some problems in my own country, but in essence, the history that connects Africa and the West, I think, is started in the 18th century, then when the Western countries arrived to Africa. They were looking for the black gold. This was not oil and gas. This was about our people, about black slaves, the workforce that had to enrich their masters. And ever since, the West came up with the notion of a protectorate. They signed an agreement with some of the rulers of the colonies, and it was in 1984, and these agreements were violated by the West, and the West continued its colonial policy, resorting to more aggressive means. They presented that as if the African nations needed it, but it was a bloody policy. They ruled us as is appropriate for masters. Railways and automobile roads, highways that they built in Africa, they cost blood and sweat of African people and probably claimed lives of many Africans. All those sentimental talks that France now engages with us may be very deceptive. But in essence, they keep trying to enslave our peoples. The Western companies that try to work in Africa do not spare our people. Still, this is about blood and sweat of the African people, and our peoples know very well what it may result in. That's a very cruel policy, a very wild policy, a very aggressive one. And the history goes on. Neocolonialism that we are living through now, actually, this is a new shade of colonialism, which trumps underfeet our independence, and which allegedly was granted to us. When we obtained our independence, we thought that the colonizers would leave our countries, but they never left. They stayed in the country. And still they are controlling our reaches. That's why now we see a chain of coup d'etats, the political regimes being ousted, and these coups have been waged by the mercenaries of Bob Sinar, who is very well known in Africa, or by the Foreign Legion. Some of the leaders of the French state admitted their mistakes, but nevertheless, it goes on and on. This story of neocolonialism is going on. In my country, we say if you lie, it means that you have something to hide. And France is telling lies to us. It hides from its own people its mistakes. It is hiding the fact that it is still a colonizing entity. They boast being a great country, but they do not admit that the end has to be put on their policy. It's high time for them to stop telling the lies to the international community. It's time for them to stop saying that they are protecting human rights, that they're the country of human rights, that they're the country of enlightenment. In essence, France, this is a country of petit bourgeois, people who benefit from our sweat and blood. They keep telling us some candid words to deceive us, but they're telling us that just in order to exploit us. They tell lies to us. They are deceiving us. They are cheating on us. They go on in circles. They offer the distorted information, fake news. They are intimidating us. They want us to be their obedient servants. How do we resist that? Neocolonialism, that's a political tendency, but at the same time, that's an economic, cultural, and social tendency. Each and every of these aspects repeats the same words. If we look at the policy of neocolonialism, that's really about negation, denial of the ability of the Africans to master their own destiny. They are distorting the political processes that are taking place in Africa. They are denying the fact that Africans can build their own national policy on their own. That's a policy which was born in 1945, and it goes on since then. In essence, these words have nothing to do with the real friendship. They tell us that there is a close connection between France and African nations, but we know the price of such a policy. We know what they say in the United Nations. We know how the IMF acts. We know how the World Bank acts. They justify the status of the African countries as the former colonies, and they act as such in the United Nations. Once they are voting for the United Nations Security Council resolutions and the resolutions of the General Assembly. Look at what is going on in Mali when Colonel Kikoita seized power, and the West is very much against that. In terms of the economy, we also see that our countries still are poor and weak economic-wise. We have no funds, we have no money, we have nothing in order to develop our economy. We have to have our national currency, not the one which is being imposed on us. They keep saying that this is a humanitarian aid. And they tell us that this is how they help us. But there are many African leaders who follow that way, who are signing totally illegal agreements with the West. They continue a policy which, in essence, is about suppressing and oppressing their own people. And this has a detrimental effect on our economy. Our resources are being plundered. We have certain contracts and agreements with the West, which means a total collapse of the policy of our national leaders, and which turns into harm and damage to our people. That's a debt which burdens us, which is put on the shoulders of the African nations. We are told that we are free and independent, but unfortunately, they tell us, you don't have money in order to develop your economy. That's why whole armies would be sent to our territories, allegedly to take care of our security. We knew that during the times of the Cold War, when there was a standoff between the capitalist and socialist camps. Then they would say that the Africans cannot defend themselves and protect their security. That's why they said that we needed military bases, foreign military bases, and troops have to be stationed there, and the Africans have to buy weapons, and these weapons would be manufactured by the Western major companies. That was about falsifying the history, distorting the history. It goes on in the domain of culture as well. I'm telling you that in order to show that culture of the former colonizers remain unchanged. They actually came up with an idea of a French-speaking world, just like it looks like a British Commonwealth. This is a tool to oppress and suppress and intoxicate the African people so that the African people still believe that they lie in the realm of France. They impose their TV on us, their books, their sports on us. This is about neocolonialism, certainly. The information which has been spread in Africa, this is another tool, another leverage in the hands of the neo-colonizers. We said that our presidents, our prime ministers, our MPs, our intellectuals obediently follow in the footsteps of the French radio and TV, which keeps telling us that France is our good friend, and that's great that France is still pursuing that neo-colonial policy. But fortunately, the internet allows us to see a totally different reality. We read different social media, tweets and other statements which would show a totally different reality. We say that there is a different opinion, not the one which is being imposed by Paris on us. Therefore, we can resist to that Western falsification. These enslaving agreements, which are signed by some of the African leaders, have to be aborted. And you remember that I was expelled from Senegal because I tore apart the French national currency. And I was criticized for what I said at the very first summit meeting between Russia and Africa. But I keep saying that culture, museums, movies, and theaters of the West, that's a very powerful leverage of neocolonialism. Probably it is invisible, but there is also soft power, which is being used on the sidelines of international conferences, where African representatives would not be invited, but there on the sidelines of the conferences and summit meetings, the French representatives would say totally different things, other things which are unheard for the African nations. And they believe they are still our masters. I keep telling our Russian friends, open up your archives and give us the evidence of real neocolonial policy of the Western countries. I do think that you have that evidence. They want to rewrite the history, but in essence, this is up to us to present the real history, to show what our needs are. In 1944, 1945, you were in Berlin. We did not attend the Yalta conference, so we were not when you defeated Berlin, but these archives could show how the West is falsifying the history and how it promotes neocolonialism. Brothers and sisters from Africa, I'm turning to you as well. Every day, we are risking our lives. We are putting our lives at stake, trying to rewrite the realities which are being imposed on us. I ask you, upon your return to your home countries, please do whatever it takes in order to expel the rich men and to take the destiny of your countries in your own hands, so that we become richer, that we become successful and affluent people, decent ones. which are free and independent. In 2021, I was voted into the legislature of the Ivory Coast. I tried to get access to the archives that would disclose how the African nations were oppressed and suppressed.
This is why I keep advocating for openness. I'm a champion of openness, and I call upon you not to vote for the laws that are meant to permeate and make linger the dictatorship of the West and the dominance of the West, make it persist at the expense of our natural reserves. The Congo Basin doesn't constitute the lungs of the planet. It's the lungs of the Republic of Congo, and Congo should be the one to use the natural resources of that basin, not some alien countries. We are to capitalize on the wealth of our flora and fauna and mineral reserves. Please block ratification of all types of agreements with Western countries that presuppose export of raw materials, unprocessed raw materials from your countries. Do your utmost to liquidate Western military bases on your territories. We have lost a lot of times. Let's not wait anymore. Let's act. Thank you very much. We're running out of time. It has been quite an ardent and a burning intervention, and definitely that is inciting other. Donat Batuma, Federative Republic of Nigeria, is the next to take the floor.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you most vehemently for this opportunity to, even as a young person, grace such an occasion. There is a Russian phrase which says, "Duch vremeni," which in English translates to be the spirit of time. And in the spirit of time permits me to borrow a leaf from one of the sages Nigeria had, a novelist known as Chinua Achebe, who in an essay about the novelist as a teacher wrote that Africa, with its long nights of savagery, was not one long night of savagery. Permit me to retake. He said Africa, with all its imperfections, was not one long night of savagery that the whites or the Westerns, acting on God's behalf, delivered them from. And he went further to also establish that our history isn't just how it is written or portrayed by people like Joseph Conrad in his book Hearts of Darkness and all of these things. So what am I trying to say and do here today? I'm trying to talk to we as Africans to understand that history as we know it has different facets, and we must understand our history, otherwise we will repeat the same mistakes that we inherited as a people. Moving further, I want to establish also that history has it that the African architecture, especially as far back as the 16th century, was said to be even more advanced than what we see today in even Renaissance Italy and what have you. But then again, what happened that our civilization of Africa started resetting almost every 100 years. Now, we experienced colonialism, we experienced systems that sought to rob us of our very own identity, and then we got a system of education which tries to tell us now what our history was, what it should be, and bring a newness in our thought patterns. And we need to understand that until we learn history for ourselves, we cannot create a future that we all will be proud of and we all will be willing to hand over to the next generation. Nelson Mandela, in his book, A Long Walk to Freedom, alluded to the fact that in the spirit of Africanism, in the spirit of communalism that Africa shares, no other system came close than at the time his understanding and studying of the Russian system, which he believed at the time to be the closest there was to the African spirit. So in line with this, I would want to come to a very quick conclusion and say that is history, and we need to bring the death of such times, not that we do not understand what it did to us or forget it, but that we understand the urgency of reinventing a future and a present that works for every single African, that works for every single person that seeks to partner with Africa, not on the basis of exploitation, as it were, but on the basis of mutual benefits, respect, friendship, and joint progression. And until we achieve that mode of operation, we as a people, we as a continent, and we as the world cannot break the barriers as it is and cannot reinvent what will last the times and perilous times that are yet to come. As I take my leave, I would want to thank you once more for this opportunity and also reiterate that as Africans, we need to understand that the times are changing. And if we do not change with these times, seeking new allies, seeking new friendships that will respect our history, respect our philosophies, respect our principles, we will yet again be read about by the generations to come and then be scorned for our actions and lack of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for your brilliant intervention at one of the discussions today. Speaking about Nigeria, we quoted that country, alluded to that country, and asked, how would things stand in Nigeria? Is it really true? And the idiom that they used to utilize in Russia has very many facets. And the two ensuing speakers, Sevenych Andrei Vladimirovich, deputy head of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Union of Russia and Belarus, to take the floor, followed by another speaker. Distinguished participants of the conference, ladies and gentlemen, today we talked a lot about neocolonialism, and all of us spoke about the fact that globalization that is based on the standards of the collective West, and that is based on the brazen and blatant and insolent siphoning off resources from the emerging countries, is coming to an end and collapsing. It can't be saved. And what is to follow? What is to succeed that system? It is the main question in the current historical context. There were concerns voiced lest the old forms of colonialism and neocolonialism be represented in the future world. This is the main objective that the whole humanity is faced with, and I'd like to dedicate my intervention to the constructive discussion of how we could reach that goal. Speaking as a representative of the Parliamentary Assembly of Russia and Belarus, I'd like to address the delegates of all the African countries and tell you, if you want to make sure that Russia is willing to build a free and fair partnership-based world, if you want to receive cogent evidence of the fact that such model of economic cooperation is in existence and is taking shape, please come to Belarus. Come to Belarus and see how we have been building the Union State of Russia and Belarus, how we have been building a partnership between two sovereign states based on the single set of values and principles, respecting each other's interests and providing for the harmonious development of our economies, human capital, and you will definitely see with your own eyes that this is the model that we have been pursuing for 30 years, and it can become a foundation, a backbone of a new, free and fair, multipolar world that will be built upon the main principle of each nation, each people having a right to development, and no one will have a right to strip a nation of that opportunity. I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your intervention. Shubin Vladimir, Senior Research Fellow of the Russian Academy of Sciences, will make the final presentation, and our time is elapsing. We are shortly to depart for the dinner. So your report is on the USSR and its fight to decolonize Africa. Many of you know Vladimir for his struggle in the times of the USSR for the sake of decolonizing Africa. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me the floor and for your kind introduction, dear friends. I will say a few words. I know that everybody is tired, the Sentinel is tired. I am the last to speak, and very important words have been voiced of precluding, warping the history. For that sake, we should work in archives, etc. Thank goodness this is being done, probably insufficiently. It so happened that, you probably know the USSR initiated the declaration of providing independence to colonial countries and peoples that was approved by the UN in the end of 1960. And before, I had been to North Africa, and each month a new independent nation emerged. 17 nations appeared on that year. But later on, that process was suspended along the line of North Angola, Zambezi, Ruvuma, on the border of Tanzania and Mozambique. Those rulers, the Portugal Empire, and the South African Republic, the then South African Republic, would not concede anything. So this is why our country back then had to participate actively in a military way, directly or indirectly, in the liberation and emancipation of those countries. Everyone has recalled Mandela and quoted him. I will also allude to him when we met on the 3rd of July 1991, when they first held an open Congress of the African National Congress, and he was elected chairman. He told me, had it not been for you, wouldn't be here now. And they were at that stage, negotiating with the then regime, opening up a new chapter, of their independence. So it so happened that when we attended a meeting of the National Assembly of the South Africa on the 9th of May of 1994, that was the victory back then of the African people, but it was a victory for us on the Victory Day. So anyway, we had to struggle and fight in arms alongside our African brothers, and many African people studied here in the USSR. They studied military profession and other professions and trades. Not long ago from where we are now situated, there was a flat where 5 militants and fighters of the South African Congress were trained. 3 of them became ministers, and 2 of them are now attending this conference. And my last point would be, well, it has been mentioned that alongside the sanctions and the economic restrictions and difficulties, we're now seeing the hindering dominance of the West in the mass media, on social and mass media. When people say that Russia is coming back to Africa, I cannot agree, because we never left Africa. But, the number of our media outlets and their offices, was reduced to a minimum. Up to now, in the sub-Saharan Africa, we never had a journalist in Moscow from there. I was pleased to see African media working here actively. I hope they will not confine to this event only, but will also reflect the new age between us. Unfortunately, sometimes biased coverage about Africa appears on our media and vice versa. And now we are in the view of the second Russia-Africa summit in St. Pete. I must mention in this respect a media event by TASS news agency organized, and it was a formidable one, a serious one. So I hope we will organize many more, and I would call and urge on all the MPs from Africa to give a push to shove to our cooperation on mass media and in other fields. Thank you very much. Before I give the word for concluding remarks to the respected moderator, distinguished moderator, Mr. Slutsky, I must say and warn everyone that those who have not submitted their speaking points, please do that, mailing them to africa@duma.gov.ru, Africa with a capital letter, and definitely we will distribute that email address in the writing, and we expect to receive your speaking points, the texts of your interventions, and we will for sure make them public. We will present a compendium that will be then submitted and sent out to all the authors. And now I'd like to yield to Mr. Slutsky for a concluding set of remarks. Thank you very much, Mr. Leonid. Dear colleagues, we have had 2-something hours of intensive work now, and all of you attending are accustomed to visiting international fora, conferences, and workshops. Without much ado, I want to say that today we're feeling a special degree of unity in the audience. So the topic that we are now discussing is the moment of truth, not only for the African continent, but also for this country, whether we'll follow up on the neocolonialism or post-neocolonialism, or we'll call it a day. Anyway, this is the relationship of a master and a slave, and our opponents are trying to inflict it upon us.
This is not our way. This is not the way of our children. Our way is to act together in close cooperation and interaction. I am confident that we will work much closer among our politicians. So we will make sure that the infrastructural projects come true, that we, not anyone else, either in Washington or any other city, would determine our way for development. We have to efficiently teach our children, making sure that we would save our perennial traditions, values, history, that we would value the sovereignty of every country. This is why we have to check whether we are on the same page. This is why our conference actually would would somehow move us to a total different orbit, different stage of cooperation between the State Duma and African parliaments. In essence, we act as precursors of a very powerful second Russia-Africa summit meeting I mentioned from the very outset, which will be held under the supervision of the President of the Russian Federation, to be hosted by St. Petersburg. We are setting up much closer interaction between the State Duma and the parliaments that send their representatives to attend this conference. This conference today, within a day's work, has already passed through the point of no return. We'd like to be together. Only together we can implement what the speaker speaking from that rostrum told us. We would like to put an end, once and forever, to put an end to neocolonialism in any its manifestations, in any country, on any continent. Really, neocolonialism in its any manifestations, aggressive or academic, has no place in the new global architecture of 2021, which has been created, which is being set up right now, today. We see the nascence of safe and secure world order, a multipolar one, which will be contributed to by all the representatives of the African nations which stand up for the common sense, for security, for the balanced and equal cooperation between the countries in the 21st century. Russia will prove for itself and for other countries of the world that profess the same approach, that only multipolar world is possible, nothing else should come true in the 21st century. We have to respect every country, every people. Our augmenting cooperation with the parliaments of African nations stand as a paragon of such an interaction. This conference would lay a foundation for our future cooperation, for dozens of reports and presentations to be delivered at different parliaments will make a contribution to the agenda of the meetings between different delegations, would kickstart a new friendship between the MPs who listened to the pitches of many speakers who stood up against neocolonialism in its any shape. Today we are creating our future in the name of the only possible development, both in the international affairs and elsewhere, in the name of the well-balanced, safe and secure international architecture. We are going to interact for the sake of that, denying any forms of incumbent neocolonialism and post-neocolonialism. We will tightly interact in the best interests of our countries, our peoples, in the name of safe and secure development of the mankind in the 21st century. I'm sorry for saying such loud words, but I really must say that. Thank you so much for attending our roundtable discussion, and we'll continue our work. Colleagues, and now we have to hurry up, getting onto the buses. The boat will not leave without us, but nevertheless, we have to get out of the hotel, because actually little time is left until we have our evening party.